Hola, comrades! Today's topic of interest is A Link to the Past. This game has been analyzed since its release, and has seen its reputation fluctuate depending on the era. It was first received as a bold new step forward for the series. Then, it was overshadowed by Ocarina of Time. Then it was rediscovered when the backlash against Ocarina set in. Then, it was replaced as the cool kid Zelda title when Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening rose in popularity. It's certainly better than the first two games of the series, and it established many of the conventions that continue to define the series to this day. It's expansive, it's diverse, it's thoughtful, it imposed order on the chaos of the original entries, but it pales in comparison to the next landmark entry in the franchise. Most often it's compared to Ocarina, and that's a fair comparison. A Link to the Past remains the gold standard for two-dimensional Zelda games, just as Ocarina remained the gold standard for 3D Zelda games until the release of Breath of the Wild in 2017. Both are expansive, both are giant leaps forward for the series, both have basic narratives that are made much more interesting by a handful of interesting twists, and, perhaps most prominently, both include travel between two different versions of the same world. Defenders of A Link to the Past claim that Ocarina ripped the earlier game off, but really, nothing could be further from the truth. A rip-off is copying without being smart about it. Use words correctly. There's nothing wrong with copying if you recontextualize the material into a new context, hence the saying, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Making great art is not about being original, it's about studying those who came before you and using what they created to further your own vision. Also, for the record, Ocarina does it better than A Link to the Past. Just saying. The Dark World in A Link to the Past is supposed to be the golden realm of the goddesses, only corrupted by Ganon, but it looks more or less like a standard quote-unquote bad version of the Light World. Admittedly, it's a creatively designed dystopia, and the overworld music is excellent and jaunty, sounding like an inspired mashup of a Morricone theme and a 19th century revolutionary march. But the contrast has no meaning. The benefits are purely ludic. After exploring a peaceful version of the world, you get to explore a ravaged version of the same world. It feels more like a way for the programmers to provide twice as much gameplay while not having to program in twice as much content. In Ocarina, it's different. The second world you visit isn't some mystical dark world. No, it's your own world, just 7 years in the future. It is only ravaged because you weren't there to protect it, and that makes all the difference in the universe. Every grisly sight can be directly tied to your inability to act, adding an immediacy to your quest to set the world right. This is, by the way, also why Korra Season 4 works so well. But despite its faults, A Link to the Past is the game that defined what Zelda would become. The original Legend of Zelda is a classic for a reason, and it sold 9 million copies, but as a narrative, it's slight. If it were turned into a movie, it would be but passable fantasy, and even that's being kind. It certainly wouldn't come close to the titans of the genre, like The Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, or even Tales from Earthsea. Sure, you have the introduction of the main leads, Link, Zelda, and Ganon, but they have no personality. The world of Hyrule is vague at best. There's the Triforce, but only 2 pieces of it are introduced. 2. And the history behind it is blurry. This is all well and good for an exploration-based game that was released over 30 years ago, but it isn't enough to build a franchise around. It was A Link to the Past that transformed Zelda from a couple of randomly placed games to an iconic series that continues to revolutionize gaming to this day. Much of that is in the backstory. The golden goddesses of Hyrule aren't mentioned by name, that would only come later in Ocarina, but they are mentioned, and that matters. It implies greater, more arcane powers at work than those explicitly mentioned in the events of the game. This would lead to the ethereal ephemerality of Wind Waker, the fatalism of Majora's Mask, and the Baroque Gothic trappings of Twilight Princess, before culminating in the elevated cosmological lyricism of Skyward Sword. The three goddesses even feature as actual characters in the Oracle's games, adding to their presence in the Zelda mythology. Zelda herself is still not much of an actual character though, but she does actually do something. She's more than a Princess Peach-like ornament placed upon an excuse plot. She escapes through the castle sewers with Link, and she helps break the seal surrounding Ganon's lair. Link and Ganon are also marginally more characterized, though their characters would be expanded in earnest starting in Ocarina. And then there's the Triforce itself. What I find most interesting about Zelda's Mythos is that it does not offer moralistic conclusions despite existing inside a framework that is inherently moralistic. Traditional Western fantasy is tied inexorably to a formal Christian worldview. See Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, etc. Zelda borrows heavily from that, but its morality is more Eastern. Consider the end of Skyward Sword, which basically states that there will always be a Zelda, a Link, and a Ganon, and that they will be locked into these predefined roles. This elevation of these symbols started as early as A Link to the Past. The Triforce is established there as a force that can be used for great good or great evil, depending on who wields it. Zelda is not just a princess here, but an integral magical character. Ganon is not just a pig monster, but something much darker and more sinister. I talk about what this game did for the Zelda mythos, but really, the idea of there being a true, conscious Zelda mythos started with A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past, despite its tawdry, insipid title, deserves its place in the pantheon of SNES classics. I'd rank it significantly below Final Fantasy VI, but this is the first Zelda game that actually works as a complete video game experience. Zelda 2 is a mess, let's be honest. And the original is interesting if you're looking for old school challenge, but it is outshone utterly by the modern oeuvre. It's not that interesting. A Link to the Past is not the transcendent masterpiece that its defenders claim it is, and those who ardently shield the game from criticism are, in fact, more annoying than the Ocarina of Time fanboys they so passionately resent, but it is the first Zelda game released that still holds up today, and judged on pure gameplay terms, it's the second best Zelda of the 90s, ranking ahead of Link's Awakening, which I adore, but is tedious to actually play through. Check this one out if you somehow have missed it. It's a great experience. Anyway, if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more mythological content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that historical stuff. Adios, comrades!